California Governor Gavin Newsom has found his replacement to fill the vacant U.S. Senate seat in California that was held by the late Senator Dianne Feinstein, who died at the age of 90 last Thursday evening. And that person is Laphonza Butler, a former advisor to Vice President Harris, who currently serves as president of Emily's List. Newsom made the announcement late Sunday evening after a weekend full of anticipation ahead of the decision. Newsom had pledged previously to select a black woman to fill Feinstein's seat should it ever become open, and Butler's appointment fills that pledge. Let's watch the announcement.
Time and again, we have been told what choices we can and cannot make. We have come together across race and across place to respond to questions about our rights with clarity and resolve. Nursing home workers in 33 facilities that have improved standards. We have to walk that road together, California. We have to walk that road arm in arm.
Butler will finish out the remainder of Feinstein's term in Washington, D.C. ahead of the 2024 election.
All right. First off, as I've said on this program before, I think it was a mistake to not announce any other interests, qualifications, characteristics that he wanted in a replacement for Feinstein other than that she be black. I think it is regrettable and frankly reflective of where not just racial dynamics are in this country, but also the kind of disproportionate lack of funding that historically marginalized groups have in their efforts to seek an office as lofty as the Senate, that there are no black women in the Senate, and there haven't been since Kamala Harris left the Senate to join the White House. However, announcing that in the way that he did, I think just puts a target on whoever he chooses back and makes them seem like an identity candidate that doesn't have any alternate qualifications. It undermines that person and their efforts to be a good senator and undermines their public perception. And it's something that if he prioritized it, he could have done without announcing it in advance. I truly don't see the purpose of it. That being said, it is interesting how this particular woman is being characterized. As you noticed in the announcement, they describe her as being a labor advocate who previously headed Emily's List, which is an organization that endeavors to get women elected in politics.
If they're pro-choice.
If they're well, yes, if they're pro-choice. But it is also true, and David Sirota, a journalist at The Lever, pointed out, she seems to have completely undermined her whole career of labor advocacy to advise Uber in its fight against its workers who wanted to be characterized as employers as opposed to independent contractors to get some basic protections as employees in the state of California, a crushing fight over Prop 22. So is Gavin Newsom, who's also being looked at for his potential presidential ambitions, running in a different lane as Joe Biden as the most anti-labor president in our lifetime, or at least in this current presidential cycle, offering an alternative to Joe Biden, who just joined striking workers on the picket line in Detroit?
I mean, it seems that way. He just vetoed that bill that would have restricted driverless vehicles, much to the chagrin of the unions in California. And I was very shocked by that because at the same time, he had vetoed the legislation that would potentially take away children from parents who refuse to affirm their gender identity. So he was trying to split the middle somehow, but going anti-labor seemed like a boneheaded move to me. This pick I find particularly craven, though, because this woman doesn't even live in California. She lives in Silver Spring, Maryland. She is rushing to re-register to vote in California because she voted in the last election in Maryland. She headed up this huge fundraising organization for campaigns, which seems really convenient. You know, he selects her, then she's basically in his pocket. She owes him, right, if he does decide to run for president. And it's also, I think, a disservice to voters to pick someone who doesn't have any political history, because she doesn't really have a voting record for voters to use to identify whether or not they support her positions. The only political track record she really has is she was an aide to Kamala Harris, which doesn't bode well, and also to Hillary Clinton's failed 2016 presidential campaign. So what are really the qualifications besides having her hand on the lever of massive amounts of donor money?
I think that's a really important point to point out, that she has all this influence, particularly in the fundraising realm. Taking a step back, remember, Gavin Newsom's in this tricky situation because currently running for Feinstein's seat were Barbara Lee, a black woman, but a black woman.
Who criticized him for his announcement.
Yeah, well, this particular announcement?
Yeah, well, no, criticized him for saying that he wanted to pick a black woman for the seat.
Good on Barbara Lee, because I saw some progressives pointing out that Barbara Lee is arguably still being punished for being the sole vote against the authorization of use of military force in Iraq. Like, she, you know, that was one of the most courageous things that any elected politician has ever done. A genuine anti-war move, and a single solitary vote there in the House. And some people have been arguing, in light of this Gavin Newsom appointment, that they still haven't let her live it down. That even though people will kind of superficially celebrate her for it in retrospect, and not falling for the weapons of mass destruction brouhaha, she's paying the price. So there's Barbara Lee, there is and Katie Porter and Adam Schiff are the main big three running for the seat. And there was this argument that if he were to appoint Barbara Lee in the interim spot, it would give her an unfair advantage, and he would be putting the thumb on the scale in a way that was inappropriate. That being said, it seems like there was no condition here in this appointment for Ms. Butler that she can't run in this race as well. So this could further complicate things for those who have already started these campaigns. If she has the power of incumbency, is she going to get enough name recognition in the short term that she actually might end up being not just the interim senator, but a longer-term senator?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really important. There is apparently no condition that she would have to step aside. And so anybody that he selected for that seat without that condition would have that seemingly unfair advantage.
Right.
And it's also important to point out, I think, too, that this whole situation could have been avoided, right? If 2 years ago, when Democrats started raising concerns about Senator Feinstein's health.
2 years ago, probably 20 years ago.
Well, sure, fair. I'm thinking specifically of, I think it was a New York Times article where some anonymous staffers and fellow senators were speaking out about her cognitive decline. And if the people around her would have just asked her to step aside and enjoy her final years at home with her family instead of jetting back and forth between California and DC, then the people could have had the direct say in who this seat is going to be filled by. Now they're going to have essentially what is a sham election, or at the very least, an election that is not as fair as it should have been. You had Nancy Pelosi pulling for Feinstein to make it through her tenure so that Adam Schiff could be her sort of hand-picked successor. And she didn't want Gavin Newsom to be able to get the replacement, which everybody thought was going to be Barbara Lee. So I think many people were very surprised by this decision. And you had this to the point that Nancy Pelosi's daughter is literally wheelchairing Senator Feinstein around the Senate. I mean, everything about it is pretty despicable, in my opinion, what they did to that woman. And sure, she should have stepped aside 5 years ago, and these people don't, because they make tons of money in Congress and they get wealthy and they leave it to their family. Granted, she married a billionaire, but she's leaving $100 million estate to her kids.
It's incredible, the gap between what her congressional salary was and what her ultimate wealth was, and it speaks volumes about the incentives that exist in Congress. To your point about 2 years ago versus 20 years ago, I was looking for this tweet. A former law school classmate of mine, Jay Willis, he tweeted that he was fondly remembering his tenure as an unpaid intern in Dianne Feinstein's office when we were all like, look, I'm not a doctor, but this person doesn't seem like she's in super great shape to be one of those 100 U.S. senators. Anyway, this was 2010.
Oh my gosh.
Way back in 2010. So you're completely right. This was an avoidable problem. We'll see politically what the ramifications are for this particular appointment, especially as people start digging more into her background. Stick around for that, and we're rising right after this.